Now, have you heard the one about the Irish World Cup football team? They flew their players halfway around the world for the greatest contest in the sport, and then they sent their captain, the star of the squad, all the way home again before they'd even played a match. Roy Keane, a man who apparently doesn't much like people making Irish jokes, was given his marching orders today for being a disruptive influence. So, the only player in the team who could be pretty sure of a place in a World 11 won't be taken to the pitch.
I have sent him home.
Any regrets at all?
No regrets.
Nah, I knew that the field wasn't going to be ready, yeah?
This was an island without any football pitch. This is madness. Absolute madness.
You're obviously very upset about it.
I am.
Like, had we all lost the plot?
The mother-in-law had to intervene to bring us back together.
During the ride to the airport, there was pretty much silence.
I'm a senior player. I'm drained. I'm shattered. How do you think the young lads are?
It's wrong, I think, to just paint it as...
People look at them as role models.
Mick, the simple man, and Roy, the genius.
They're cowards.
It's much more complex than that.
I want to play for Ireland.
It was our Roman drama, and he was our greatest warrior.
It's quite possibly the worst preparation any country has ever had for a World Cup final.
Once upon a time, the Republic of Ireland's football fans were one big happy army. The terraces sang "You'll Never Beat the Irish." Families all over the country watched games from the edges of their seats. Ours was no different. Then came the nightmare of Saipan, May 2002, just before the World Cup in Korea and Japan. But we begin on an ordinary Friday night, long after that story is finished. Over a year after being sent home from the World Cup, Roy Keane has been sorely missed by his struggling Irish team.
Hey, Gareth.
Well, the wife's brother.
Is out because of yellow cards. I mean, I know people will start saying, what about Roy?
Yeah, what about Roy? I would love to see Roy Keane say, yes, I'll come and play for you in this game because you need me. And I think a lot of people who haven't forgiven him for what happened in Japan would forgive him.
Not even if he crawled back on his hands and knees. That pup is a traitor and a disgrace to his country.
Would you two ever just drop it? It's not like we don't know the whole story inside out already.
The whole story? I wonder. If only football, like love, meant never having to say you're sorry, I wouldn't have this sorry old tale to tell. Mick McCarthy, once captain of Ireland himself, had been our manager for 6 years. His gift was to motivate a squad of mostly fairly average players to play beyond themselves. In the process, he earned the love and respect of, well, most of them anyway. The exception was our captain, Roy Keane, a world-class player and international icon who had won more silverware as captain of Manchester United than the rest of the Irish posse combined. He drove the lads on like a ringmaster with a troop of poodles, always leading by example. Despite their differences, Roy and Mick had brought us unbeaten through 10 qualification games and a couple of crazy playoffs against Iran. But whatever shenanigans had been going on, by the time they left Dublin Airport for the Far East, it seems that relations between Mick and Roy had gotten worse.
The Dublin Airport stuff, I think the fuse was lit at that time. Because look what was happening here. You had us all in together, we're on the one road. Journalists, FAI people, and footballers, all on the same plane. And you can see how sensitive boyos like Keane would say, we're expected to be the performing monkeys here. So I think from the time they left Dublin Airport and where they headed off on this package holiday to Saipan, a little bit of bonding on the way, and then we all go out and give it a lash. I reckon you could see that it was a disaster waiting to happen.
This is where I think Mick made a mistake. He should have perhaps rang his captain up or met him face to face and said, look, this is our plan. But perhaps it mightn't be the best for you because you've had a long season. He had been exempt for various situations before. So why not now?
Don't think Roy took too kind to the fact that my paper, the Irish Sun, had sent out 2 men dressed as leprechauns. That didn't go down too well, and he had a row with and had words with other journalists en route to Saipan. I think one in Amsterdam airport and one on the actual flight from Amsterdam to Tokyo. So I suppose that it was setting the pattern for what was to follow.
And so we were off. Destination Saipan, a little island with a dark past on the far side of the world. The American invasion during World War II had led to mass suicides among the population and even more American casualties than at Normandy. The plan? Before heading to Japan the following Friday for a week of serious pre-tournament training, to linger 6 days here and acclimatise.
Well, for Saipan, you have to understand that soccer is not a big sport here. And even though the World Cup is a premier world event, for people on Saipan, it's not that big of a deal. So when Ireland came as a team, there wasn't a whole lot of excitement, to be blunt, to be perfectly honest. They were coming to train here. That's fine. They're tourists. We need tourists.
The reason why they came here was obviously because of the proximity to Japan. Similar climate in the summer. They wanted to get these players acclimatized to the heat, to the sun, and have them in the same time zone than the World Cup games would be played.
I know I did, and anyone else who was living here at the time, were quite emphatic in advising them against taking too strenuous a training activity because you're going to fry. Nobody in their right mind here goes out and runs around at that time of the morning. Mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. When the team arrived here at the Hyatt Hotel, there was a local welcoming committee and with some leis, flowers to welcome the team. What I noticed was that Roy went straight to the room, whereas the other players socialized with them and had some tea in the lobby.
At that point, the world was still in order.
In late May 2002, our national airline and our fishing industry seemed headed for the toilet. Bertie Ahern was busy trying to form a government.
Canada have a hard job to do. They have to play a very difficult first-round match.
Further away, India and Pakistan were squaring up over Kashmir in a nuclear sort of way.
It's pretty hot for the lads over in Japan.
But these things were trivial to those of us looking forward to 6 weeks of footy on the telly. And with the boys in green out in the Far East, the country was in a state of heightened anticipation.
If you're 7 up for it, simply spot the ball. How you play it is up to you.
But little did we know back home that our heroes had been having logistical issues since landing on Saipan, and that Roy Keane was not his usual carefree self. It wasn't just that they'd landed on the Saturday to find no training gear, no hydration fluids and no footballs. Those, at least, washed ashore on Monday. There was another matter needling the Irish captain which wasn't so easily fixed.
One of the issues that they had when they came to select this island was they wanted to have, obviously, a decent training pitch. The local authorities assured them that they will build a state-of-the-art facility for them. It definitely was not exactly state-of-the-art.
They had dug up this place and dumped a bunch of old cement, concrete, all sorts of stuff in here. I think they were not anticipating on using this area again for sports and stuff. But then the Irish came up and said, yo, we need a field. I knew what they were going to expect, and I knew that the field wasn't going to be ready. When it rains, it made puddles and holes. When it gets dry, it's just solid as a rock. Back then, they also had some big holes that the ground would just sink down, so there were certain areas. Every day, we'd have to check and cover it up, you know.
It had been specially prepared for the Irish team, but I wouldn't have liked to have seen it if it hadn't been specially prepared.
On Tuesday, May 21st, the lads head off for training at the Olea Sports Complex, just 10 minutes away along the island's main strip. It's still morning, but the temperature is already starting to boil.
Saipan is not the soccer capital of the world. It's not the soccer capital of the Pacific. It's not even the soccer capital of the Marianas. I mean, we did not even have a real soccer field. Little League Baseball here has more people coming out for a game on a Sunday morning than people showing up to see the Ireland national team getting ready for the World Cup. There was hardly anybody there. There's nobody lining up to get autographs.
To be honest, journalists weren't bothering going to training sessions because we didn't expect them to be doing major work, so there wasn't a whole lot of point when the photographers went.
I actually didn't notice much happening on the field until my 11-year-old son came over to me and said, Dad, what's a fucking bollocks? Obviously, I was a bit taken aback by it. I said, where did you hear that? And he said, oh, Roy Keane just called one of those guys a fucking bollocks.
So what was the rumpus? On the face of it, Roy blew a gasket when he saw the goalkeepers retiring early from training, just when the usual end-of-session match was about to kick off. After directing some filthy language at the goalies, he stormed off to fume alone on the team bus. Shortly after getting back to the hotel, Roy went to Mick and told him he'd had enough. Whatever it was that was bugging him, he wanted to go home.
Well, welcome back, folks, and have I got news for you. Trust me, Roy Keane is gone. It's a text message from John Doe, who describes himself as a friend of someone in the know. Fair play to you, John Doe. Stephen in Nace says...
What's up with Keane? Did someone rattle his cage?
He just lost the rag. He'd be grand.
The time difference, it was extraordinary because we'd slept through the night that night, and it was the burning question that hopefully there'll be a change of that we wake up to something tomorrow different.
Saipan is 9 hours ahead of Ireland, so as the squad lay down their heads that night, we have just woken up. And from here on, the fairy tale becomes a soap opera of 24-hour satellite ping pong.
What is Roy Keane up to, threatening to walk out of the preparations for the World Cup and take himself home? Tony O'Donoghue is on the line from Saipan. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, David. And it seems in the last few hours he decided to pack up and leave the squad, clearly shocked Mick McCarthy, and now he's decided to stay.
And there was a sort of a relief, you know, hoping, okay, you know, this is great. At least somebody had seen a bit of sense. There was a bit of wisdom there. And hopefully now, let's go forward.
So first he was, and then he wasn't going home. How come? Well, it seems he'd gone to Mick and said he wanted out before his blood had had a chance to cool. Mick had said, ah, no. Roy said, ah, yes. Mick said, I'd better call up Colin Healy, so Roy said, fine. But then Roy went back to his room to a night of long sighs and phone calls from home, and the next morning told Mick that upon mature reflection, he thought he might hang around after all. With 5 minutes to go before the team sheets had to be finalised for FIFA, the Irish captain was back in the squad, and young Colin Healy was back to planning a holiday in Lanzarote with his girlfriend.
You know, he said to me afterwards that he had some personal problems as well that really needed to be sorted, and that he wanted to go home. But he's changed that decision. He's now here. And
I think initially people were shocked, but they were given misinformation. The big lie was that Roy Keane was walking out on Ireland. That's not what happened. He did. He said he was going to do it. Then he's thought about it and decided to stay.
You've criticised John for his article in the Herald tonight,
It's a disgraceful attack on a great player. You say in this article that Mick McCarthy should have sent him home.
I said if I were the manager, I would send him home. Yes, and I stand by that. Because Mick McCarthy is the manager of the team. Roy Keane.
I was here at home when the Keane story broke. I was listening to The Last Word. I had become a Dunphy addict.
But don't forget, Roy Keane is also a problem to Mick McCarthy.
Because I had already been doing research, I had this idea that, well, you know, I really should be recording this. I gathered all tapes, news tapes, new tapes from anywhere in the house, anywhere I could find them. Gathered every machine I could, had them tuned in to different channels. I had the satellite dish, which was able to pick up certain radio channels, and I just had several tapes on the go at the same time.
Roy Keane has carried this hysteric is the way the media kind of hone in on this straight away. We have all problems in our lives, but we do not walk.
That led to a whole outpouring of whether he should have, whether he shouldn't have. How would the team put all this behind them? How could he do something so cruel when all our hopes were pinned on it?
So a lot of people say, well, it's typical of Roy and Roy should really shut up, but I can't, especially if I'm captain of the team. When we come over here, we travel halfway across the world, and the training pitch is a disgrace. And somebody's got to hold a hand up and say, it's like training on a car park. Bloody rock hard. We've had 1 or 2 injuries already, and I expect a few more. Sometimes you can't really worry too much about other people, you know. As I said, I've got to look after Roy Keane. And sometimes, of course, you know, you do have to do what's best for other people. As I said, if it wasn't for my family, probably, and obviously the millions of fans, I'm not saying for any other reason, I'd be at home now.
But then there was a kind of a collective sigh of relief anyway. He's staying. They'll pull it together. We're off.
Wednesday's training session went off without any bad language at all, under the hungry gaze of the media.
He's training this morning, he's fine, he's in with the lads, they're all gathered round him, they're all together. Maybe these things are sent to try us, and what often happens with the Irish team, we strengthen our resolve and we'll be stronger for it.
Amen. Afterwards, most of the lads went off to shoot a few holes on the Greg Norman-designed golf course. On their way out of the hotel, they might have spotted that great cherub of sports writers, Tom Humphreys, loitering innocently in the lobby. While they drove and putted in the heat, Roy coolly spilled the beans to Tom in an interview intended for the Irish Times Saturday edition, but which instantly became too hot to sit on till then, and was published the following morning.
Roy was critical of the organisation, critical of the FAI, and he was implicitly critical of McCarthy in that piece.
I think Roy was ill-advised to be able to go at that time with it, because it seemed that there was a truce drawn about the whole situation that he was, but then that just lit the whole thing up again.
Makes 3 jokes, all mildly at his own expense. When he's talking about suicide cliff, and he talks playfully about, you know, throwing himself off. He talks about not being able to lose Alan Kelly as an acquaintance, if not a friend, because he'd had nobody to talk to. And then the third one was the well-known one, where he talks about you know, the day when he becomes a manager. He'd have great facilities, but nobody play for him. So, you know, that ability then to make these jokes, which are mildly at his own expense, suggests that this is a guy who's relaxed, he's got this off his chest. He's looking forward to the tournament. But there are dark clouds gathering on the horizon almost at that very moment.
On Thursday morning, I read that interview and pray that Mick and the lads will never see it.
One of the journalists printed off the article, and it was given to Mick. He took it away to peruse it, and I suppose we all know what happened then.
That's when the whole thing blew up.
So that famous evening, I came back from dinner, parked my car over there in the car park, and as I walked into the lobby, I was told that there's a last-minute press conference over in the Chinese room, so I walked over there to find out what's going on.
I think I was in my hotel room when I think it was Paul Kimmage knocked on a few doors to say that there was going to be a press conference. We were gathered in the hotel foyer. It wasn't quite clear what was happening. A couple of people, backroom staff, walking around looking a bit shocked.
So as I came in our Chinese room, the team, or some of the team members and the press were assembled, and they were just about to start a press conference.
I've called a meeting and asked anybody, certainly Roy, to make his comments. Rationally and logically, and that didn't happen. I'm afraid that turned into a bit of a slangy match, and I'm afraid I will not tolerate, not being spoken to like that, but the level of abuse that was thrown at me. So I have sent him home.
Good afternoon. The headlines this Thursday lunchtime. Preparations for Ireland's World Cup soccer campaign have been thrown into disarray after the captain Roy Keane was ordered home.
If we don't get a good result in this World Cup, it will look like the trailer for The Godfather Part 4. There will be blood everywhere.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
I think it's an act of monumental folly on the part of the manager.
The same with Roy. He wants to prepare for this major competition. It could be his last. He wants to go on a high.
I blame nobody, only the FAI, the management and the John Giles media.
Welcome back. You're listening to the News at 1 on one of those days when the back page becomes the front page, when the world of sport produces the big news.
And bursts into tears.
This morning, I have to get to the bottom of what exactly happened yesterday. All the papers say that Mick insisted at lunchtime that Tuesday's bust-up was history, but each rag has its own version of subsequent events. It seems that news of Roy's interview in yesterday's Irish Times began to rumble through in the afternoon. Mick somehow got a hold of a printout of it.
OK, Roy, you're having trouble with setup. Would you like to get anything off your chest? Like what you told Irish Times?
No, Mick. I already told you Tuesday.
Oh, yeah, right, you did and all, yeah. But you never said you were going running to papers. Won't you tell lads about Dickie Nee, eh? Why you couldn't play second match against the Iranians? 'Cause you had to give it good sunbathing.
How fucking dare you accuse me of that, you bollocks? You were useless as a player, and now you're useless as a manager, you fucking wanker. Ugh. The only reason I have any dealings with you is that somehow you're the manager of my country. You're not even Irish, you English cunt. You can stick your World Cup up your bollocks.
Pack your flaming bags, son. You're going home.
That was just after 8:30. Mick called a press conference for 9 o'clock.
I have sent him home.
At the core of all of this is a staged team meeting at which the Irish Times piece with Tom Humphries is flourished, is brandished, and McCarthy attempts to demean his captain in the most disgusting and disgraceful terms. He accuses him of faking an injury. Now, that was a completely outrageous and provocative thing to do.
I just thought it was very ill-advised. Now, when I say ill-advised, like I felt heartbroken, like I felt like ringing up and saying, what are you at? And I remember reading an account of what Roy was supposed to have said. And I do remember laughing and thinking, not a chance after this.
I've never witnessed anything like that in my life. And you know, there is a line, you can't cross it. And unfortunately, Roy has crossed it.
All those hardened professional footballers, all shocked to the core by something Roy Keane had said to Mick McCarthy. I don't believe that for a second. He couldn't possibly have said something that would have shocked them so much that they couldn't talk about it. That was nonsense.
As the hours went on, little bits of what had been said came out. It did seem fairly certain that the one thing that had set Roy off was this accusation of feigning injury. The specific thing was in relation to the playoff against Iran.
The previous November, after we'd won the first leg of the qualification playoff in Dublin against Iran 2-0, Roy had hobbled off to France for treatment on his knee and missed the return game. In Tehran the following week, we lost 1-0 but scraped through anyway, and in the national euphoria that followed, Roy's absence seemed forgiven and forgotten. Until now.
If ever there's an occasion that Roy Keane is needed for Ireland, it was Tehran. There's 100,000 people there. This was as tough as it gets. And Roy Keane was due to go to Iran, but he subsequently again played for Manchester United the following weekend.
He actually hadn't played for Manchester United for a couple of weeks previous because of injuries, and he was given special leave by Manchester United to play on the home leg. So he just was not fit to travel. And for Mick McCarthy to say to Roy Keane, you know, you were faking injury, you know, it was like a red rag to a bull, because the man, I would say, would go on crutches onto the field for Ireland.
Roy missed a lot of friendlies. There's some incredible statistic that I think his last away friendly was in the early to mid-90s, you know. There was a sort of general charade around every friendly that, you know, Roy couldn't do it because he had an injury, and then he played for his club the following week.
In the early hours of the Friday morning, just 8 days before our opening match, all the occupants of the 7th floor of the south wing of the Saipan Hyatt left quietly for the airport, bar one. He would be making the lonely trek back to Manchester later that day.
Around lunchtime, he called down to the front office manager and asked to get his bill, wanted to settle his bill, and asked for transportation to the airport. And he also mentioned that he would face the press on the way out. Must have been roughly somewhere down this corridor where Roy decided that he does not want to see the press. So we're getting off on the 2nd floor here, remembering that down on the 1st floor all the press was waiting for Roy to come down. Oh, this is where we smuggled him over across without the press knowing. So that's where I was waiting with the car. Roy jumped in and we drove off to the airport. So as the front office manager sees me drive away with Roy in this car, he grabs the waiting limousine with Roy's luggage in the trunk and follows us. Unfortunately, he doesn't give us a lot of a head start. So immediately the press realizes that there is something amiss. They grab a taxi and they follow us to the airport. During the ride to the airport, there was pretty much silence, and then once we approached the airport, he thanked me for all the help. He was very courteous, but there was no other discussion. The press was waiting out here. I went to open the door for Roy.
But before he could check in, Roy was snared by BBC Northern Ireland's Stephen Watson.
Can you give us any insight into what happened last night?
No.
Can you even tell us how you're feeling at the moment?
Feel very good. Clear conscience. And I'm happy to be going home. Happy to go and see my family.
Any regrets at all?
No regrets.
Not even about playing in the World Cup?
There's more important things to worry about.
So what's your plans from here?
Get my flight.
The image of Roy Keane with such a straight back and a steady gaze, what sprung to my mind looking at him was Coriolanus, and I thought, here is Ireland's Coriolanus. Proud, proud Roy Keane.
He had booked a flight from Saipan to Guam, from Guam to Hong Kong, and then back to the UK. The press didn't know that. They were all assuming that he was on the Tokyo flight. The press obviously boarded the Tokyo flight even before Roy made it onto the Continental flight, and they only found out as the plane took off that there was no Roy on the plane. That was quite amusing.
As the rest of the lads touched down at their new state-of-the-art headquarters in Izumo, Japan, Roy was in mid-air over the frozen wastes of Siberia. And here at home, the story was top of our leader's agenda.
There's a huge public interest in this, it would be just great if it can be reconciled. I do not know if it can or not.
We got more contact on this of people's hurt and rage and anger and sadness and mourning than we did following 9/11. I mean, can you believe that? And I wondered if we maybe all hadn't lost our sense of priorities just a little bit. And close to tears all day.
Yeah, every time I heard it, I was on the radio, but I couldn't believe what was happening. Not before my eyes, but what I was listening to what was happening. And it was so sad because, I've been looking forward to this since the last time we were in the World Cup. I'm not going.
Thank you. Marcella, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, Jerry. I just think it's very sad, really.
You're obviously very upset about it.
I am.
While the nation mourns the loss of our star player, our football gurus are bickering like starlings over the airwaves.
I must say this to you, Ed. Since we've been discussing this case for the last 2 or 3 days, you have not seen one little thing wrong with Roy Keane whatsoever. You haven't. Everybody's been wrong as far as in the Roy Keane situation. You are defending him. But you don't see if anybody's listening to you, you think Roy Keane has been a total pro, been brilliant, and Mick McCarthy's picked on him, or somebody else has picked on him. That's the way it's coming. Well, that's the way it's coming across to me.
Yeah, that's the way it's coming across to me as well.
But that's okay.
Oh, I think I could get
on the 24th, the Friday, Jerry Ryan's guest was Eamon Dunphy. So here we have Dunphy moving from his own programme onto another. And they had this fascinating conversation.
Well, Eamon, you've put yourself once again into the firing line yourself. Do you know what I smell, Eamon? I smell amateur riflemen lining up to shoot the finest buck male in the herd.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jerry.
There are two things going on here. First of all, there's a certain kind of fantasy around, what masculinity is. And the metaphor of powerful animals is one that is used to kind of try and give a literal embodiment to ideas about masculinity. But it's all to do with kind of, animal strength, power.
Let's kick the fairies out of the bedroom here now and put some flesh on the bones here, because people think this is a sodality meeting. Guys, when you're playing soccer at this level, it's not. He called his manager a fucking wanker. He said, you're a crap person, you're a crap coach. That's not spectacularly unusual. Sure it's not, to hear that kind of language?
Not at all. I mean, it happens, especially in all-male environment like the soccer camp. I mean, guys have rows.
But the second thing that's going on is that when these two guys are talking in these terms, these kind of fantasy terms about Keane, they're also performing a particular kind of masculine identity themselves by aligning themselves with one model of masculinity and heightening that by dismissing the other players as
wagons, you know. and here we have this great man. He's a lovely family, lovely wife, looks after his parents, all his qualities, doesn't like the bullshit around soccer and all of that. Perfect human being.
That evening on the Late Late Show, Jack Charlton offers a more down-to-earth response to Roy's antics.
Not sending him home, I would have got a hold of him and thrown him out the door.
What does that spell? Coat, maybe? And that? I'd say bananas. So, Roy Keane called Mick McCarthy an English coat and told him to stick the World Cup up his bananas.
At this point, there is only the one topic of conversation in Ireland, and the nation has gone bananas. Dawn to dusk media saturation all week has ensured that people of all hues up and down the country have been moved to public displays of support or disgust.
What do you do if the manager is a muppet?
Like, this man is a social parasite. Surely he is the ambassador for the Irish.
That guy's a bollock, and if I could stick a dagger through
Why did Roy Keane have to make such an absolute song and dance about something that they were leaving?
Why didn't he just wait till the whole situation calmed down?
I think that as it developed throughout the week, it became about much more than football. It became about character and responsibilities and loyalty, and treason was used.
I will be supporting Cameroon on Saturday morning, and I hope they kick the living daylights out of the Irish team.
Charlie. Rows were happening in families about where blame should be assigned. I mean, there were people within families who disagreed so much that they wouldn't talk to one another.
In my particular instance, I had the brother-in-law who was the opposite, totally opposite view to me in relation to and it caused major problem. I think the mother-in-law had to intervene to bring us back together.
That's how strong I feel about it, Mariam. And then I hope Germany annihilate.
Not alone did it split the whole country down the centre, but I have a very good friend of mine, and for example, he went into the anti-Roy camp, and of course I stayed firmly in the Roy camp, and for the first time in over 30 years, we fell out over this. We had a couple of heated arguments, and we went our separate ways, and we didn't speak to each other for nearly 2.5 months.
Well, all the meetings and one man doesn't make a team. The fact that you know two strong-headed people.
This can't be.
The guy at the bottom of the road now, all we do now even to this day is nod to one another because we went at it. It was unbelievable. This was a residence dinner dance, and the girls just stood back and just looked at one another, shaking their heads. It was, as Gwen said, it was probably the worst dinner dance she ever attended. And we haven't gone to one since.
There was civil war in your house, I understand, last week.
There is still civil war.
Oh, there is still civil war.
Yeah. I've got
It was like civil war, but you have to say civil war, but this time with a smile on your face, you know, because at the risk of getting shot, it ultimately was only about football, like nobody lost their lives.
These are trying days for those of you who are not interested in soccer. My apologies to you.
No one quite knew what had or hadn't happened. And then even if they knew, everyone had a strong opinion, strong feelings about it. Women phoning in, he's a traitor, for example.
I'm trying to stay calm, but the red mist sometimes descends, and once that happens...
We play football on a Thursday night, and words were exchanged in the dressing room. And the match that we've always had traditionally that kicks off at 9 didn't kick off at all that particular evening. We'd one individual who just up and left.
The disgraced Ireland football captain Roy Keane is back at his home in Cheshire.